these very nuanced and complicated human beings are. And with fiction, we were able to do that, which was so exciting. And we wanted to paint these very gray areas and this nuance of, everyone is complicated, everyone is human, and you feel different things about different people as the story is going on. I mean, and that's or at least we hope so. That's what we wanted to accomplish as writers here. And we always knew that the friendship was going to come first in the book, that the friendship is so important. Christine and I just cherish our female friendships, and they're so important to us. And we really wanted to see that kind of lifelong bond on the page. So with everything that we wrote, we thought about how does this impact the friendship? Because it's not just about the shooting and this incident. So everything that we did had to always go back to the friendship. And we asked ourselves that question hundreds of times. How does this impact these women's friendship? Like what is the purpose of what we're doing in this scene? And how does it go back to that?
Yes, because the racial issues are a huge part of it, and probably like front and center. But there's also like Jen is about to become a mom, and Riley is like big into her career, so she doesn't really relate and isn't sure how their friendship is going to move forward right through that life change as well. Yeah, so just so much. I was saying it reminded me of a really good episode of Grey's Anatomy, because like it's not just one thing happening, it's like 25 different things happening. And it really, it's like all of these are big life events.
Yeah.
And then you're putting all of them together in one like 3-day experience.
We'll take a comparison to Grey's Anatomy. We're into that.
Any day. I know, that's what I said. But also, I mean, it is, we wanted to tap into what is difficult and universal about all long-term friendships, right? And so the race elements, as you mentioned, are specific to Riley and Jen as an interracial friendship and the incident that serves as, kind of the conflict between them. But beyond that, they have the kind of everyday common friendship frictions that come from a long-term friendship. Like, how do you grow together? What happens when somebody makes more money than somebody else? Or what happens when somebody has kids and somebody doesn't? Or your common interests change, or you move to different cities, or you move back to the same city, or what, like, how is your friendship evolving, changing, and growing in each of these moments along the way? And even if this tragedy didn't happen, they would still have to do, a lot of that same reckoning. The stakes were ratcheted by this specific event, but no matter what, Riley moving home to Philadelphia for the first time in a long time, and Jen having a baby, and Riley's career, those were always going to be things that were going to affect them.
Mm-hmm. So I just thought of like 8 more questions. Hopefully people are writing the ones I'm thinking about, and so I can ask them later. But I did want to address something that I sort of assumed going into reading the book that I found out later wasn't true, is that, so one of the main characters is Black, the other one is white. And the way the story is told is it flips back and forth between their perspectives. And the 2 authors, one of you is Black and one of you is white. And so going into reading it, I sort of assumed that you had each written the perspective of one character. And I found out after reading it that that wasn't the case. And so was it like writing these 2 characters together, and each of you would have had to put on sort of the perspective of an experience you haven't lived firsthand? And what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, our writing process was so collaborative that, just the way we write, we work in a Google document, which is the only way to do this. And we each take a chapter based on like, if we're really feeling like what's going to happen next in the narrative, regardless of whether or not it was the white character or the Black character. Because so much of these experiences do have to do with race, but a lot of them are universal female experiences, of which both of us have a lot of experience. Especially when you think about the class issues and the money issues and the wanting to be ambitious in your job, and then getting pregnant and how do you feel when one of your friends gets married and gets pregnant and then they move on. So there was so much of each character that we could very easily put ourselves into that character. And when it came to race and when it came to very specific things, such as, I mean, Christine is child-free, I have 2 children, I was very pregnant or, with a newborn this entire process. Those are things that then we would really talk out loud to each other about. And even, I'll let Christine speak to this, but even some of the race stuff, it got hard for her at times to put like her personal experiences and thoughts on the page. And so we talked about it out loud, and I asked Christine questions and she asked me questions, and we went back and forth when we got to those parts of the book.
Yeah, I think that it was a good balance of writing together so that we had a real cohesive voice. We didn't want it to feel disjointed and to feel like a book that 2 people wrote, but we also really wanted to be intentional about why we wrote this book together, which was to bring different experiences and perspectives to the table, right? And so we just were mindful of both of those goals throughout the whole process.
So I don't know, I'm constantly on this journey of trying to be a better ally and supporter of my Black friends. It's something that I didn't even realize what an ally was until I was in grad school, which I'm pretty sure means that like most people still like never are educated about race issues in a formal setting. But one thing that I feel like I've known internally for a while is that like the one thing I know is that I do not know what it is like to be in someone else's head. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you have to do as a writer. Mm-hmm. But in this situation, you're doing it for someone of a different race while discussing racial issues, while someone who may have that lived experience is like reading over your work in real time. What did you do? I mean, like it has to be an incredibly vulnerable learning experience for both of you. What did you do to kind of hold space for each other and hold space for yourselves as you go through that?
Yeah, it required a lot of uncomfortable conversations. Christine and I were new friends when this started, the book process started, and we'd become friends as adults and also professional friends first. So we hadn't really had conversations about race. And the truth of the matter is that Christine is my current very good Black friend. I grew up in a very white suburb. I went to an incredibly white high school. My college was very segregated. And that I knew I had to know that was a burden for her as we were writing this book about race together. On the other hand, since I've been a journalist for so long, I've constantly convinced myself I can report my way out of anything. And that's not the case with this subject. I mean, it really is something that, reporting through interrogation doesn't get you where you need to be. But you have to immerse yourself in this topic and do the work and really kind of interrogate yourself and your world and why am I in such a bubble, and how can I be a better ally? And I had to do a lot of that work on my own and not put that on Christine. And also then we just had to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable and having uncomfortable conversations. Christine a lot of times gave me the grace to say things, like to ask questions. And I had to let go of a lot of anxiety that I know that a lot of white people have, of saying the wrong thing, of sounding stupid, of not knowing what to say, because being terrified of talking about race isn't the right path either. Mm-hmm. It is a muscle. It's something that we have to get used to, and it's so, I mean, we see this across the world, but it is such an American thing too, of how terrified we are of talking about race. Even when Christine and I do book events, like I can see the fear in a lot of white people's eyes when we're like, all right, well, we're gonna go there. And they're nervous and they're anxious. And we're hoping that the book gives people some ways to start discussions they wouldn't normally have, because the characters can be proxies. I think it's easier to talk about fictional characters than it is to say, these are my experiences and biases, or you can get into that, but once you start with the characters, right? It's like a gateway.
And I think, most people do not have a close friend, or, really a friend, period, of another race. And particularly in America, like we're talking about a Black-white dynamic. I mean, not that it's not important to have friends of all different races, but this is a particular American a dichotomy. And so if you don't, then you not only have no exposure to what it's like to be Black in this country, right? You have a lot of assumptions and whatever, but you don't know, because the only way you really know, as you mentioned, and somebody else's experience, is to listen to them, talk to them, and to have empathy and care for them. So since there's a whole swath of people who do not have that, and whose racial views are either complacent or fear-based, or not, or informed by pulp culture and the news, which cannot be helpful, in this aspect, then that's a real divide, right? Like that's just a real divide, and there's no way. The only way to cross that divide is to make these kind of connections, and that was the only way that Joe and I were going to cross a divide. We had a divide to cross, right? Like these conversations to be had, where you cannot be friends with a Black person in America without talking about race or without understanding their experiences. And I think sometimes white people or white allies even can underestimate that, right? Like you can't proclaim yourself necessarily an ally or a friend without knowing what's involved in that, right? It's why so often you can see white people say that they're closer to Black people than they might think they are, right? Like, that's my best friend. And the Black person's like, well, no, not so much, right? And and it's because a lot of that is because, we can go have a drink together, play golf together, or, have dinner together, but there's still going to be a level of superficiality to that relationship that a white person may underestimate until, you're willing to actually go there in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I think this is a great book for friends to read if they're interested in trying to have those conversations. I think like book clubs, I feel like are gonna absolutely love this. But just because it does offer some insight and some ways to start having those conversations when you talk about the characters. And I think that's this is in some ways like a huge service to those of us who have spent the last year or two wondering, how do I start to have these conversations in a way that maybe we can get, it's always going to be awkward when you're in it. I don't think there's any way out of that. I think you just have to open yourself up to it, but at least the way in, I think you guys have made it a little bit less abrasive to transition into that conversation. So thank you for that.
Because so much of book clubs are about the book, but they're also about sharing personal experience, right? You read a book about infidelity, and then it's a segue to be like, yeah, well, my first husband cheated on me, or when you just you pivot, right, to talk about personal experiences. And so we're hoping that that's a way for people to do that too, that it starts with the characters, as Joe said, and then it turns into more personal sharing or more vulnerable sharing. At least, that's the goal.
Well, and we've seen it happening. The book's been out in the world for 2 months now, and we've been doing this
that's
thing.
so crazy to think. Wow.
I know. We've kind of become Tinder for readers. So we've been hooking up diverse readers and diverse book clubs. So, a lot of book clubs are quite segregated. And so we're hooking up, traditionally white book clubs with traditionally Black book clubs, so they can talk about the book, and also individual readers. I can send you the thing that we post on social media if any of your readers want to find a stranger to just talk about race and social justice with. And we're pairing people up not just along racial lines, but generational lines too, because we think that there's a lot in here to unpack when it comes to how different generations view these issues.
Definitely. And geography too, where you live in the country can make a difference.
Definitely. I want to talk a little bit about the character of Riley and how she seems to navigate what I can only imagine is one of the most intense situations you would have to face as a reporter, in the way that she reports on this story. I guess, how did you come up with that, the way she tackled it? Obviously, she's not a perfect person. All of these characters are very real and have a lot of flaws. But in some ways, it seems like she's a model of how the media can do better by these families, and how they can present a more real picture through the media, instead of what we have so far.
Well, I think it's the personal dynamic. I mean, what you tried to show on the page is that Riley, as professional as she may be, and for better or worse, she feels a personal stake in the story, right? And covering it then matters. It matters for herself and her community. And it's this sort of like when, oh, this person looks like me and I care about this, so I'm going to make sure I'm giving it the best human, intense, thoughtful coverage, right? But because the mainstream media, so to speak, has been so white for so long, that kind of care and respect and personal, oh, that could have been my daughter that was raped, that could have been my daughter that's been kidnapped, that could have been, and so you get that level of sincerity and investment in some of these stories. But when that person didn't look like the reporter, it's like, yes, tonight at 10, this XYZ happened and we're on. I mean, that really slanted and really biased coverage. And so you can, through Riley, because she has such a personal stake, she's motivated to get the story right? Because she really cares about what's happening. And she wants to do right and do good and use her platform to affect change. And we wanted to show, even if she's making some questionable choices along the way, like keeping her affiliation with Jen a secret, that that's comes from a noble place, at least, she can justify her motivation.
Okay. Another thing that I wanted to ask about is sort of the bookending of the story with, at the very beginning, you find out that Riley's grandmother is ill and passing away. And then at the very end of the story, Jen has her baby. So sort of bookending the story of friendship, you have one generation going out and a new generation coming into the story. And what do you think the characters and maybe all of us can take from that transition to help us move forward to a place where maybe these conversations aren't as hard? Maybe, hopefully, these events are not as common.
Yeah. I mean, you're actually the first person to bring that up.
Yeah, it's actually really good.
It's a really beautiful observation, because it's true. I look at my kids and I see, I mean, they're being raised in a world that, I mean, still so problematic in so many ways, but like, I feel like they're so much more open-minded and thoughtful. I think the generations coming up, we will see a lot of change. I'm hoping we'll see a lot of change. And one of your cat is that cat or dog?
It's a dog, but it's basically a cat. Yeah.
Yeah.
We already met the cat. The cat made an appearance earlier.
Well, that was when my internet went out, because one of my children probably gnawed through the cord. But we wanted the book to have a certain level of hopefulness, right? Like, we didn't want this book to, make anyone. We didn't want people to walk away and be like, this is unsolvable, this is unfixable. And so by introducing a new life and a whole new generation, and also, that makes me think about Kevin's letter to Justin's mother, where he says, I want to do better by my child than his family did by him. Because he was when we talk about how people think about race, so much of it comes from our families. And that's how we form so many opinions. And you have to think that that's obviously how a lot of Kevin's opinions and characteristics were formed. And that's why we wanted the reader to see his family so intimately. But then in his letter to Justin's mother, he says he will tell his son what happened. And I think that there's a level of hope there that Chase is going to grow up very differently than how Kevin did, and kind of break this chain, that is such a tragedy. I mean, it's incumbent on white people to do this work. This is a problem for white people to solve. It's not a problem for Black people to have to solve. We have to, break the chains of systemic racism that have been going on for so long. It's incumbent upon us. So what I'm hoping that we show kind of that hopefulness when the readers leave the book.
And it was really important us to include Gigi too. I mean, as you mentioned, to show that it's so easy. And I think one of the fundamental problems in Americans are talking about race is this inclination to be like, that was the past, that was ancient history, that was so long ago, that's over, we fixed that, look at Obama. Blah. I mean, it's really kind of laughable, the urge, the compulsion almost, to really want to be like, oh no, we're done with that. When clearly we're not. And so that dissonance of somebody saying, no, racism is over when it's not, that's really, the problem. I was going to use a curse word, but I'll keep it. That's Joe's area. But we wanted to show, when you see Gigi, a living, breathing person, who has stories and racial trauma and, from her own childhood, then it's impossible, to feel like this was so far back in history. It's like, these are situations, legacies, pain, trauma that, exist right now in this moment in time, in families in America.
I'm getting a message from Kaylee about questions. So
Hot off the press.
Okay. Yeah, we've got some questions from our viewers.
Oh, I love it.
Okay. Do you worry about potential backlash with this book? Which I feel like part of this book, if you've read it, there's a huge subline about like media backlash to literally anything you do. Pretty early on, Jen, like completely out of nowhere, is bombarded by reporters, and in a very relatable and also a very like, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that moment. She says like, no, like my best friend is Black, which is true for her. And also like, when you watch it, it's like, oh God, she wasn't supposed to say that at that moment. But yeah, so you took on, this isn't just any book about friendship. It also touches on some really painful points in our society right now. What kind of backlash were you worried about? Have you received any of that? And
Yeah, we talked a lot about potential backlash. We thought about it a lot. People asked us if we were worried about it at some point. I remember people saying, aren't you afraid of being canceled? And I said, yeah, but we're doing it anyway. Christine has a whole different take on that, and I'll let her chime in. But I think some of the things we prepared for didn't happen. There's been backlash, but it's been different than what we prepared for. We did so much research with cops and with cops' wives, and I know we were nervous that we would get that wrong. There would be big backlash in the police community. And so far, we've actually gotten really wonderful responses from the folks that we talked to. We've talked to, since the book's been out, a lot of police wives have been on a lot of these book events. And they're really grateful to see their experience, on the page in such an authentic way. But none of the backlash has been, I think, maybe as bad as we thought it would be. It is a difficult subject to tackle. We knew, and this was not just some thriller about a bunch of middle-aged ladies going to a cabin and drinking too much rosé and then someone goes missing. we knew we were touching the third rail in America with tackling race. And more than anything, the conversations have just been interesting and the discussion has been lively. And like people are on social media and in these events, people are opening up parts of themselves and talking about stories I don't think they talk about very often. And so it's been so rewarding. And yeah, we have not gotten some of the negative feedback that I thought we might get, because we do live in a society that has such knee-jerk reactions to things, which drives me insane as a journalist. That, you know, there are some people who've read the synopsis of the book and then they're like, hate it, honest, I don't love this, I don't like that this is happening, that you wrote this, without reading it. Or that assume things about us and our writing process without ever listening to an interview with us. And I think that's disgusting. But beyond that, it's been awesome. It's been great.
Yeah, I feel like you always want to strike a chord one way or another, and you hope it's a positive chord when you publish a book, right? And I really do think that we have, you know, the people who love the book, you know, really it resonated with them, right? Like the kind of conversations we have are really meaningful and interesting, and you know, to Joe's point, not the kind of conversations that you can have about a thriller necessarily, which is we love thrillers, you know, nothing
Love
that. But it's harder. You're not necessarily opening up about, you know, really personal things necessarily. I guess it depends on what the thriller is about. But we have been, I think, really overwhelmed and grateful that the response to our book has been so positive. And I think that says something hopeful right there, that we could write a book about race in America in 2021 and not have the kind of conflict, lightning, you know, angry, et cetera, blow up about it, that on par this publication process has been so thoughtful and so positive, is really, I think, heartening.
I haven't seen a lot of negative backlash. I will say to anyone who's like hesitant about picking up the book because you're not sure if you're ready for something that's super deep and super intense about police shootings and racial issues, and racism, like if you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like what I want to read before I go to bed, it's a really engaging story as well. Like it's not a novel that's preaching. It's not like a how-to manual. It's not even nonfiction. Like it is a deeply moving personal story, and just like, honestly, really a heck of a great read. Like it goes down real smooth while you're reading it. There are a couple of times I had to stop and like put it down and be like, I just need to feel the feelings for a little bit. But it is a really, I don't know how to say it other than like, it's an incredibly enjoyable way to be exposed to a lot of these thoughts and issues and ideas.
It's so funny how Joe and I always talk about, like, people often feel guilty about saying that, right? They're like, the book was so fun, I loved reading it, it was like so compelling, like things like that. And they're like, I mean,
like,
I did. I mean, it was serious too. And
I cried. I did cry.
That's the balance we wanted to achieve, right? Like we wanted to write a good, compelling story that, you know, wasn't painful, like taking your medicine, like you have to read this book. And so we appreciate you saying that. And I think that that's why social media in this case has been, for better or worse, you know, we all have our issues with social media, but I do think there are a lot of people that were probably hesitant about reading this book for a lot of different reasons. And so the word of mouth really helps, right? Like they might not have taken a chance on it, but thank God somebody else did, and then says, no, you know, I've kind of screened it for you, and it might not be what you were thinking it is. And that's been really helpful, because, you know, it's hard to do when people, as Joe said earlier, you know, make so many assumptions based on the barest of facts, you know, just hearing the like who we are or one line about the book, right, without, you know, getting more information. And so the you saying that, in other words, really helps. So if anybody out there was feeling skeptical before this, I hope that helps too.
Oh, well, sort of to play on that, one of our other questions is if you could sell this book with only one sentence,
Oh,
what would
wow.
it be? Apparently we've got some really challenging questions.
Yeah.
Our like unofficial tagline has been "Come for the friendship, stay for the social justice."
But I think what happens when an interracial friendship is upended by a police shooting is, that is the sentence. And I mean, the particulars here add another layer, but there are plenty of, and we've heard this in our conversations, there are plenty of interracial friendships who have not had these conversations around police shootings or other headlines, right? So this is mirrored in society. So yes, Jen's husband being the officer, and yes, Riley covering the story is pretty particular, and not a lot of people are going to have that experience. But broadly, George Floyd, I mean, that was a touchstone for a reason, that a lot of people had to have these conversations and did, and they were either hopeful or uncomfortable or hard or healing or what have you, but they were having them. And so that's mirrored in that kind of one line of the book, the synopsis.
And so another question we got, and we have a lot of writers and aspiring writers in our audience. So we got a question about what your typical writing style is. And I think this is fun because we've got two different writers at very different stages in their novelist careers.
And I think we have two very different writing styles.
We do. So when I'm writing alone, I'm very fly by the seat of my pants. I subscribe to a certain word count a day. It's either 1,000 or 2,000, depending where I'm at in a project. I don't typically do really robust outlines. I know where things are going in my head, but then I just sit down and let it flow. That is not possible when you're writing a book with another person. And Christine loves to plan, just loves it. Hates Google Docs, loves to plan. And so we had to have a really robust outline to get through this book. I mean, just because both of us needed to be on the same page. We had to communicate so much about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and when we felt comfortable trying new things, and how not to hurt the other person's feelings when we didn't think something was working. So yeah, it's very, very different than when I'm writing a novel on my own.
But I think writing style, tell me if you disagree, Joe. I think writing style is a little bit different. I mean, I think that's part of the seat of the pants thing, but I'm a very Joe's much faster because she'll just sit and bang out, I'm going to put 1,000 words. I can't really do that. I have to I don't know. I just can't do that. I have to be really meticulous, and then, look at a sentence 5 times and then leave and come back and look at that paragraph again, that kind of thing. And then I can't move to the next paragraph until I've kind of done that. And so it's just, it's a more laborious process for sure, but I can't make my mind work in a slap it down kind of way, the way, which a lot of writers just get words on the page. And maybe that's just, like you said, there are different stages and careers or styles. I don't know, but we do have two very different processes, and we have to, part of the beauty and the challenge, but hopefully the beauty of working with another person is leaning into those changes and being respectful of them. You know what I mean? There's not one right or wrong way to write a book, for sure. Everybody does it differently. And so that's why even people are always asking us writing advice. And I will say that as much as we can give it, it's really about you finding your own way to write. And there's not a method. If you do this and you work from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and you do this work count a day, and then you edit a week, and that it's not as, everyone's looking for the hack, but it's not as rigid as that. So I think finding what works for you is good plan.
And then I'm guessing, so Joe, you said that you were pregnant and had a newborn while you were going through this process.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that makes it a little more okay, this is the time I have. I'm going to sit down and this time will be filled with words. Or
Totally. Yeah. I mean, well, also, like, so I do just slap words down, but I don't let myself edit until I've got like 25 pages or 50 pages. Like, and then I'll go back and like fix, like, that's when I like do the line edits and the nitty gritty and fix sentences and stuff like that. For some reason, narrative just flows out of me if I just let it go.
Mhm.
But I also think that my strengths are often in plot and action, and Christine is very good with like filling in details and emotion in a different way. So I think that our strengths really and our weaknesses really do complement each other.
So, okay, so one last question from the audience. I guess probably a different answer for each of you. Personally, what was the hardest part of writing this book?
Mm.
For me, I would say that writing is just really hard. I mean, it's hard for me to tell other writers this because I loved being an editor and I really just wanted to be an editor the rest of my life. Like, truly, this really was just like a little bit spontaneous. So I'm really truly writing for the first time. Like, I didn't write short stories, I didn't write essays for contact. Like, I never wrote a thing. And so I think the discovery of doing it, I mean, anytime you do something for the first time, I shouldn't have been as shocked as I was that how hard it is. But I'm sure it's like picking up tennis or golf. Like, you're not comfortable with it at the beginning. Like, it takes a lot of work, and new muscles and new ways of thinking about things and new ways to even structure your day and things like that. So that was a steep learning curve for me, but a really gratifying one too, because I think we should all be trying to do different things at different stages in our life. And so, it's really hard to switch careers. Not everybody can go from like one thing to a completely different thing. So this is maybe unusual in that aspect, but it's still like the idea of stretching and getting a new hobby or getting a new craft or just something to challenge you. And I felt really challenged, but that's not a bad thing. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think the hardest part for me was really, like, as I said before, like interrogating my own experiences with race and figuring out how I wanted to present those on the page, and not just on the page, but when we're having these conversations, right? I've had to make myself, I think, really vulnerable, and sometimes I might fuck it up, and I'm still anxious when we're talking about a lot of these things. But I think that was the most challenging, but also one of the more rewarding parts of this. But I think, I kind of compare it to like, I don't want to say I had this like crazy racial awakening through the writing of this book, but I definitely do see things through a different lens now. I've compared it before to like, you're nearsighted for so long, and then you don't know that you're nearsighted, and then you get glasses and you're like, holy shit, I can see in such a different way. We were hearing that from a lot of readers too, that they're like, I just didn't get it. And again, because race is such a volatile issue in this country, and it is covered often in a very superficial, us versus them, tribalistic way. But when you hear stories about race that are just human fucking stories, I think, see, this is what Christine meant when she's like, Joe's the one that curses. I am. Then you can relate to it a lot more. It's one thing to hear about redlining and systemic racism when reading a New York Times article, but it's a whole other thing to fall in love with a character like Riley's family and Gigi and hear about how they were kept out of certain neighborhoods and how, the lynching in the family's history was not, so far back in the distant past. It affected this woman that we've come to love on the page in such an intense way, that we think that those kinds of details will breed a lot of empathy with readers.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. So we're about ready to close it out. I think Kaylee is going to come back to to help us transition out. Because as we've previously discussed, I don't know how to work the magic that's bringing
There
us
she is.
together today.
She's back.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with us. As I said before, if you guys are interested in getting We Are Not Like Them, you can order through our website, coming to the store. As you can see, Megan is showing it off. We really enjoyed you guys being here with us, and this is really great to hear you guys. So thank you
Oh, we
again.
love
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Please come when you write your next one. Come back
Yes, oh my God, of
and work
course.
with us again.
And I've
Yeah,
actually never
absolutely.
been to Tallahassee before, so maybe next one's in person in Tallahassee.
Exactly. And
Who
I'm
would
there.
like
I will
to
be
come to
right there with you guys.
Tallahassee?
It's much warmer here, just saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's reason enough.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great night.
You too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You too. Bye.